know when you know you should do something? I mean, everyone has this experience, I believe. Perhaps you would be willing to put up your hands if this experience is foreign to you. Okay? There's part of you telling you you should do something, and it's hard to do it, effortful, and maybe you're afraid of it, and so you don't do it, you just procrastinate, right? And so how do you feel about that? Good? I mean, so what, you feel that you're betraying yourself, your anxiety actually gets worse, not better, even though, you know, you can put it off moment to moment, but that doesn't help because every time you put it off, the anxiety just grows a little bit. You're not proud of yourself, you have a sense that you're making things more chaotic than they should be. You know, and if you do that long enough, and I'm sure many of you have had that experience, if you do that long enough, if that becomes habitual, things will get so stormy around you that you'll fall right into the chaos, into the watery chaos, and maybe you'll drown. So it's not a very good idea to run from your destiny, let's say, whatever that might be. And you need a destiny, you need a place to aim at, because that's what gives your life meaning. And you need meaning in your life because life is hard. So, you know, you need something to buttress yourself against that. So anyways, they wake Jonah up, and Jonah says, it's probably my fault because, like, I'm running away from something I'm supposed to do, and, you know, God isn't very happy about that, so why don't you just throw me overboard? And the crew isn't very happy about that, but the waves are really starting to come up, and Jonah's pretty insistent that he's the cause of the problem, and so they draw lots, and Jonah is chosen, and so they decide to toss him into the ocean, and immediately everything's calm. So he's a center of chaos because he's not doing what he's supposed to do. Fine. Well, then a whale comes up and swallows him, and then he's in the whale for 3 days. That's a weird thing. The whale, that's the whale that Geppetto's in. That's a dragon. It's that thing that you have to go out there and conquer to get something of value. Now, when you've made an error, when you've fallen off the pathway, when you've deviated from what you know you should do, it produces a state of internal chaos and worry and concern. You're thrust into the unknown. You're thrust into unknown territory and chaos. You don't know what to do. And that's often symbolized by the encounter with a monster, like a dragon, or something that lives under the water. And I think the reason for that is, as far as I've been able to tell, is that human beings, because we've been prey animals for forever, we have a system in our mind that's a threat predator detection system. That's the thing that makes little kids think about monsters in the dark, right? Because, well, there is monsters in the dark. Parents always say, well, there's no monsters in the dark. It's like, that's not true. The dark is full of monsters. There might not be any in your room right at that moment, but that doesn't mean there aren't monsters in the dark. And crimes take place, like, criminals don't get up at 6 in the morning and, like, you know, have breakfast and go rob a bank. They do that sort of thing at night. People do the things that are fit for the night in the night. And lots of predators are nocturnal, and you can't see very well in the dark. And kids aren't stupid, you know. They've evolved to stay pretty damn close to the fire. When you're feeling terrible, you don't say, well, I'm feeling up. You say, I'm feeling down. Well, why is that? Well, down is worse. I guess you're flat on the ground when you're down, or you're in a hole or something like that. You're hiding in a hole. You know, it's down. And you're threatened by something, you know. Maybe you're threatened by your own inadequacy. That might be part of it. Maybe that's partly what you imagine as a monstrous force, because, you know, your proclivity towards procrastination and your weakness of character is part and parcel of why you happen to be in the underworld. And that's the underworld, the mythological underworld. That's where you go when things fall apart. And if you understand that, if you know that that's what that means, then you have one of the keys that opens up ancient stories to you, and you understand things. Your life can be organized, going very well, and then something comes up, and poof, everything changes. Some axiom that you were living by, and it might be the existence of a partner, it might be a job, it might be your health, any of those things, gone. And you go somewhere when that happens. You go somewhere. It's a state of being. You're still in the same world, but it's not the same at all anymore. Everything about it is different. It's all negative and dark, and you don't know what to do. You're confused. And so, what do you do down there in the underworld when things have fallen apart? Especially if it's the worst possible case scenario and you realize that you actually had something to do with your demise. That's really annoying, you know, when something bad happens to you and then, you know, you grind yourself into bits trying to figure out what the hell happened, and then you realize that, well, you were playing a causal role. Now sometimes you're so depressed you assume you're playing a causal role and you weren't. It's not easy to figure out by any stretch of the imagination, and it isn't that everyone who does something terrible is at fault for it, but sometimes you find that you were off the path somehow, and maybe even that you knew it and you didn't attend to it, and that's why all of this hit the fan. And so then down there in that chaos, you decide that you're going to do what you're supposed to do instead. And then maybe you get to rise up again, renewed, if you're lucky, and then you can go fix the city. And that's what this story's about. And that's why I picked the image to represent the course, because really what happens, you see, with the psychoanalysts, the road to health, if you're not doing well, which means that as you act in the world, you're not getting what you want. There's something wrong with the match between your presuppositions and your actions, habitual, and the way the world is responding to you. And so it's not turning out for you. And the question is, well, what can you do about that? And one answer might be to examine yourself for presuppositions and action patterns that are not serving you well, and to find out what they are and what to do about them. And maybe some of that is, maybe you're not moving forward because of fear, and maybe that fear is grounded in terrible experiences that you had in the past that you've never been able to understand. And maybe one of the ways of gluing yourself back together and expanding your personality so that you could in fact live properly in the world is to go back to those terrible events and untie them and straighten them out and understand them and drop them. And that's what psychotherapy is about in large part. Psychoanalytic, behavioral, doesn't matter. What are you afraid of? What are you avoiding? What are you failing to develop? Maybe from fear, maybe from avoidance, God only knows, maybe from disgust. How can you get over it? How can you reclaim those parts of yourself? So the question is, why do people pursue rewards that don't produce this resonance? They don't have a value hierarchy. So Pleasure Island, it's a good example. Those kids that were brought there were lost. So they didn't have anywhere to go. They didn't have an identity. So they default to local pleasure. And that's better than none. Although the problem with local pleasure, well, as the narrative made clear, is that you better look out if you're impulsive, because it's going to kick back on you hard. And the reason is, you're only considering the immediate time frame. And the problem is that things propagate across all the time frames. And so just because something works really well this second, cocaine for example, doesn't mean that it's a tenable solution to the class of all problems. So usually, often, people pursue local pleasure because that's the best they can imagine. It's the best they've been taught. They don't see another alternative. So it could be ignorance, it can be they don't want to adopt the responsibility, because part of the problem with working at every level of the hierarchy simultaneously is that it's like dancing to a very complex waltz, let's say. You have to be paying attention to a very large number of things simultaneously and doing things right. It requires responsibility. And so, you know, it's a pain, it's a weight. Part of the reason people drink alcohol is to get rid of their responsibility. I mean, that's, you know, you hear people drink because they have problems. It's like, yeah, no. Some people drink because they're anxious, and alcoholics drink because they're in withdrawal. But young people drink because they're sick and tired of being responsible, because it's annoying. It's like, so I'll drink enough, I won't care about the medium to long-term consequences, because alcohol, that's exactly what alcohol does. It doesn't make you ignorant of the medium to long-term consequences, but it makes you not care about them. And partly it's because it dampens anxiety. So it dampens anxiety, it leaves your positive emotion circuits intact, so then you can go out there and do stupid fun things, and that's a party, really. Let's go do stupid fun things. That's a party. But the medium to long-term consequences are, it's risky.